Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping into the really fascinating world of image generation, specifically diffusion models and these things called diffusion transformers.
Right. They produce amazing images. I mean, the quality is just incredible now. But yeah, they have their downsides.
Big downside, sometimes we're talking really long training times, lots of computational power needed, and then even generating one image can take a while.
Exactly. And there's this specific challenge with the diffusion transformers, something the researchers call the optimization dilemma.
Okay, optimization dilemma. So what's that about?
Well, think about creating an image. You need to understand the overall meaning, the semantics, like it's a cat sitting on a mat. But you also need the super fine details, the fur texture, the weave of the mat.
Right, two different levels of detail.
Precisely. And
Yeah.
traditional diffusion transformers, they use the same kind of processing modules for both jobs at every step of refining the image.
Ah, okay. So the same tools for understanding the big picture and painting the tiny details. I could see how that might cause issues.
It does. You're trying to focus on the broad shapes, the semantics, which often is sort of smoothing out high frequency details, but you need those exact details later for the final image.
Yeah, like trying to paint a detailed portrait with a house painting roller. You lose the nuance.
That's a good analogy. The paper we're looking at puts it like this: encoding low-frequency semantics necessitates reducing high-frequency components, creating tension between semantic encoding and high-frequency decoding.
So there's this built-in conflict. And that conflict, presumably, is what slows things down and makes training harder.
That's the core of it. It makes it less efficient.
Which brings us to what we're diving into today, a potential solution called the Decoupled Diffusion Transformer, or DDT. We've got the research paper here, some notes.
Yep, ready to unpack it.
Our mission then is to figure out how DDT tackles this dilemma. We want to understand how it gets faster training, faster generation, and really focus on what makes its design innovative, particularly from an academic standpoint.
Okay, so the big idea, the central innovation in DDT, is right there in the name: decoupled.
Decoupled, meaning they separated those conflicting jobs.
Exactly. Instead of one type of module doing everything, they designed two distinct components. There's a dedicated condition encoder whose whole job is semantic extraction, understanding the what.
Okay, encoder for semantics.
And then there's a specialized velocity decoder focused purely on recovering those high-frequency details, the how. The paper says, we propose a new decoupled diffusion transformer with a decoupled design, just like we said.
Divide and conquer. Makes intuitive sense. Let's dig into that condition encoder first. What's its specific role?
So the condition encoder takes the noisy image input, the time step information, sort of how far along the refinement process is, and maybe a class label like cat.
And its goal.
Its goal is to pull out just the low-frequency semantic information, the core concept. What it outputs is called the self-condition feature.
Self-condition. And architecturally, how does it do this? Anything new there?
It builds on familiar ideas like from DT or SIP models. It uses those dimension blocks and FFN blocks, the standard transformers toolkit for finding patterns and relationships.
Right, standard stuff.
But the authors mention an improved microdesign, and interestingly, long residual connections that might suggest a more direct flow of semantic information.
Okay, refinements. And how is this encoder trained? You mentioned something about alignment.
This is pretty neat. They use a technique called representation alignment, borrowing from another paper, RAPIA. They actually train the encoder to make its internal understanding of the image similar to how a very powerful pre-existing vision model, DenoV2, sees it.
Huh. So they're aligning it with a known good representation.
Exactly. They use a specific function, a math BF. Basically, it pushes the encoder's features to be closer to the denoV2 features at different stages of the process.
And why do that? What's the benefit?
The key benefit is achieving local consistency of this self-conditioned feature across different time steps, different noise levels.
Local consistency, meaning the semantic understanding stays relatively stable even as the noise changes slightly.
Precisely. That stability is crucial for an optimization they introduce later for speeding up image generation. It enables something called encoder sharing.
Ah, okay. Planting a seed for later. Got it. So the encoder figures out what's consistently. What about the how, the velocity decoder?
Velocity decoder takes over from there. It gets the noisy image, the time step, and that self-conditioned feature from the encoder.
So it gets the semantic guide.
Yes, and its job is to predict the velocity field. Think of it as predicting the direction and speed each pixel needs to move towards the final clean image. It's focused on generating the high-frequency details guided by the semantics.
Velocity field? Okay. And its architecture. Similar.
Also uses stacked attention and FFN blocks, similar structure, but it's trained differently using what's called a flow matching loss. Math call a bath curl, this loss function directly pushes the decoder to get better at predicting that velocity.
So encoder handles semantics, decoder handles the detailed path to the clean image based on those semantics. Seems logical. And does it work? What are the results like?
Oh yeah, the results are pretty impressive. They're reporting new stated FID scores. That's a standard measure of image generation quality on benchmarks like ImageNet, both at 256 by 256 and 512 by 512 resolutions.
State of the art's always good to hear. What about the speed? Did they solve that training time issue?
Significantly, they quote, for ImageNet 256 by 256, our DDT-XL2 achieves a new state-of-the-art performance of 1.31 FID, nearly 4 bytes faster training convergence compared to previous diffusion transformers.
4 times faster training. Wow. Okay, that's a huge leap.
It really is. They reached that 1.31 FID score in about 256 epochs, and even got down to 1.26 FID by 400 epochs. On the harder 512 by 512 ImageNet, they hit 1.28 FID within 500,000 fine-tuning steps, consistently beating the previous bests.
And this holds up especially for larger models, you said.
Yes, the paper notes that DDT consistently outperforms the baselines, and the advantage seems to grow as the models get bigger. It really suggests this decoupled approach scales well.
Okay, faster training, better result, that's great. But you mentioned another innovation, something about speeding up the generation process itself, the inference, tied to that local consistency.
Exactly. That local consistency of the self-conditioned feature means the semantic understanding captured by the encoder doesn't radically shift between very close denoising steps.
Right, because the underlying image meaning isn't changing practically from one tiny step to the next.
Precisely. So the insight is, why recalculate that entire semantic understanding from scratch every single time? It's computationally expensive.
Can they reuse it?
Yes, that's the encoder sharing strategy. They reuse the self-condition computed at a previous step for the current step, unless it's one of a few predetermined recalculation steps.
So you only run the expensive encoder part occasionally, saving a lot of time.
A lot of time. The question becomes, when should you recalculate? Just pick steps evenly.
Yeah, how do you know the optimal times to do it? Doing it too rarely might hurt quality, too often loses the speed benefit.
This is where another really innovative part comes in, academically speaking, statistic dynamic programming.
Dynamic programming. Okay, sounds computational.
It is. They frame finding the recalculation steps as a classic optimization problem, finding a minimal sum path. They basically calculate how similar the self-conditioned features are between different potential steps.
So they measure the actual change in semantic understanding.
Right. Then they use dynamic programming to find the sequence of recalculation steps that minimizes the quality drop, the FID score increase, while maximizing the sharing. The paper states they use a statistic dynamic programming approach to find the optimal encoder sharing strategy with negligible second-level time cost.
So it's adaptive based on how much the understanding is actually changing, not just a fixed schedule. That sounds much smarter than just, say, recalculating every 5 steps.
Exactly, and they show it works better. Compared with the naive uniform sharing, our dynamic programming delivers a minimal FID drop. You get significant speedups with very little hit to image quality.
That's really clever, leveraging the model's own internal state to optimize its performance. Okay, so faster training, faster inference. What about the architecture itself, the balance between that encoder and decoder? Did they look into that?
They did. They experimented with different ratios of encoder layers to decoder layers.
And what did they find? Is it better to have a big encoder or a big decoder?
Generally, it seems putting more resources to the encoder, making it deeper, helps performance, especially as the overall model gets bigger.
So more power dedicated to understand the semantics.
Seems that way. For their base model, something like 8 encoder layers and 4 decoder layers was good. But for their large model, they found a surprisingly aggressive ratio of 20 encoded layers to just 4 decoder layers worked best.
20-4. Wow, heavily skewed towards the encoder.
Yeah, and for their biggest XL model, it was 22 encoder layers and 6 decoder layers. It really emphasized how critical getting that robust semantic understanding is, especially when you're aiming for top quality with large models.
That reinforces the whole point of the decoupling, doesn't it? Giving the semantic part the resources it needs.
Absolutely. It all ties back to tackling that initial optimization dilemma head on.
Makes sense. And you mentioned this is all built on a flow matching framework.
Right. That's the underlying mathematical framework they use for training. Instead of predicting noise like traditional diffusion, they predict this velocity field we discussed. The paper's appendix actually shows this is mathematically equivalent to the standard approach, which provides some nice theoretical grounding.
Good to have that theoretical rigor. Did the appendix offer any other insights, maybe about why that original dilemma exists?
It did touch on that. There's an analysis looking at the spectral properties, basically, the frequencies present in the noisy image at different time steps.
Okay.
It showed how the amount of high-frequency detail from the original clean image that survives in the noisy version changes depending on the noise level. Basically, it's easier to see the low-frequency semantics when there's less noise, but harder to recover the high-frequency details, and vice versa.
Ah, so that spectral view kind of mathematically confirms the tension, that focusing on one frequency range inherently affects the other at different stages.
Exactly. It gives another perspective on why that dilemma is fundamental to the process and why separating the tasks makes sense.
Okay, so wrapping this up then, what are the absolute key takeaways, the main innovations of this decoupled diffusion transformer?
I'd say there are three core things. First, the decoupled architecture itself, separating the encoder and decoder to explicitly tackle that optimization dilemma. That's fundamental.
Right.
Second, the training methodology, especially that representation alignment, using denob2 to get consistent semantic features, which enables the third point.
Which is?
The statistic dynamic programming for optimal encoder sharing during inference, that's a really smart way to get significant speedups without just guessing.
So decoupling, clever training for consistency, and intelligent inference optimization. And the result is state-of-the-art quality, much faster training, and faster generation.
Pretty much sums it up. They directly addressed a known bottleneck in diffusion transformers and found a very effective solution.
It definitely feels like a solid step forward. It tackled that inherent conflict by just separating the conflicting parts.
Which makes you wonder, doesn't it? It leaves us with a question to think about. If decoupling works so well here for image generation, resolving this tension between semantics and details?
That where else in AI might this kind of approach work?
Exactly. What other complex AI tasks have these sorts of inherent optimization conflicts between different stages or different goals? Could explicitly separating those functions, giving them dedicated components, unlock similar performance gains elsewhere?
That's a really interesting thought, something for you, the listener, to ponder. If you want to dig into the nitty-gritty of DDT, flow matching, or dynamic programming, definitely check out the paper.
Yeah, lots to explore there.
Hopefully, this deep dive gave you a clear picture of what makes the decoupled diffusion transformer tech and why it's a noteworthy development. Thanks for joining us.